Okay, now the time is 18, and we will start this webinar. And I first leave the word to my colleague Sarah for some technical things.
Yes, hello everyone and welcome. Just some technical things, as you could read on the previous slide. We will record this webinar, so keep your microphones muted and your cameras off during the presentations. And afterwards, we will have a moment for questions, so you can write questions in the chat during the presentations, and we will address them at the end. Yes.
Oh,
And
okay.
the question part will not be recorded. So yes, that's what the one thing I forgot to say.
Yeah, okay.
We'll hand over to Agneta again.
Yes. Welcome to this webinar, which will be about from flax to linen, from seed to color and dyeing. My name is Agneta Karlsson, and I work in the Swedish Handicraft Organization. And this webinar is a collaboration between our Nordic handicraft organizations. Today we will be listening to Linda Zetterman from Sweden, Raija Jokinen from Finland, and Birgit Bonefeld from Denmark. Okay, then we start with Linda. So I say welcome to Linda. She works as a designer and teacher, and she will talk about how indigo is used today and historically to materials as linen. Welcome, Linda.
So, yes, my name is Linda Zetterman, and my lecture will focus on Japan and the indigo practice that are used there today and historically, and also different pattern methods that are used in combination with indigo dyeing. And the indigo practice in Japan is mainly focused on so-called sukumo, so that's what I'm going to talk about. And last spring, I went to Japan for a 3-week study trip, and I got a scholarship from the Scholar Foundation for Studies of Japanese Society to go there. And the reason was to dig even deeper in the subject of indigo. I've been studying indigo for 25 years now, but it's always more to learn and to know. So this time it was my fourth time in Japan, and it was all about indigo. So a little bit about Japan. Traditional textiles in Japan isn't just about appreciating their undeniable aesthetic beauty, but it's also about understanding uh, the philosophies and the cultural significance. And each technique is highly refined, and I will present some of them that are still in practice. And from ancient times until the 1600s, Japanese peasants wore clothes made from hemp mostly, a locally grown and processed bast fiber. And the craftswomen, they spun the hemp and hand-loomed the fiber threads into usable fabrics, which was turned into everyday farm field clothing and household articles. The Japanese did not distinguish between linen and hemp. The two are also named by the same word, asa. And hemp fabric was actually the only material available for general use in Japan until cotton was introduced. And the Japanese peasants, they preferred the indigo blue shade because they thought that the textile looked like the ocean. And it was also very culturally important for them. But the primary reason probably was that the indigo pigment protected from insects and snakes. And that's why the farm women preferred to use them when they worked in the fields. So, my trip to Japan, I started in Tokyo and then I went south. And I will take you to all the different spots. They are marked with red dots here on this map. So, I started up in Fujino in this traditional house. This area, it's next to Mount Fuji, and it's known or was known for mulberry silk cultivation. And this house had cultivation on the top floor, and the family lived on the downstairs. But today it's the home of two artisans, Taka and Tomo Ishii. And Taka is an indigo master, and mainly he worked with a technique called katasome. And Tomo, she's working with hand sewing mostly, and is very skilled making dresses and kimonos and everyday wear. So I went here for a private course for 5 days, and historically, the cultivation of indigo and the dyeing practice have been separated. But today, as in the rest of the world, many dyers also have started to grow their own indigo and elaborate with it. And here you can see some of Taka's work. He works mostly with a technique called katasome, and it's a technique originated from Japan, and you work with a resist paste that is applied through a paper stencil. It's called katagami, and a sticky paste mixture made from rice flour and bran is forced through a katagami paper stencil onto a piece of fabric. So that's how he made those fabrics. And this kind of fading technique is also very typical for his practice. And the stencil is removed when it's printed, and the paste on the fabric is then allowed to dry. And when the fabric is dried, here you can see a stencil that I made, cut out small pieces. Also some tools that are used for applying the rice paste. And it's like all craft in Japan, it's very precise. So when Taka learned katasome from a master, he spent like 3 months only applying this rice paste on a board, not even on fabric. So that's how you learn proper. So I had to have a speed course here for 5 days. Here you can see me printing my pattern. After you have applied the rice paste, it needs to dry, and then you start to dye the fabric. And when you dye with the indigo, the process requires many dips and also oxidations in between. And you have to dip really many times to achieve darker shades. So in this case, I dipped it 12 times, and it was oxidized also 12 times in between. And to the right, you can see you also needed to work with a hand fan so that you could keep a good circulation around the fabrics while oxidizing. So here are some pictures from the whole process. In the left corner, you can see when it's dipped into the vat, and you need to have those kind of sticks to keep the tension in the fabric so it doesn't get stuck together. And it's also over dyed, so I shifted the position and the direction of the stencil and printed twice. And here you can see the ready piece. It became a noren, a door hanging curtain, and it's also hand sewn, all due to the techniques that are used traditionally. I also got to learn some of Taka's shibori techniques, and shibori, it's a term for dyeing cloth and using binding, stitching, folding, twisting, and compressing the fabric. And quite common is that we associate it with something called tie-dyeing. And in Japan, I would say it's even more refined and precise when they use this method. So, a train trip from Fujino to this place, Aramitsu, Nagoya, in Aichi Prefecture. It's synonymous made with the craft of shibori, and it was founded in the early 17th century. And it has a really strategic position in between Kyoto and Tokyo, and that's why it became an important trade road. And here, both traders and dyers, they started to work with indigo dyeing on mostly cotton fabrics that became really special and popular in the Edo period. And the shibori technique that are most common here is a technique that's also you use a stencil to first trace the pattern, but it's actually a tie-dye technique. And first you have to apply the pattern on the fabric with water dissolvable ink. So that's what you can see here, the tools for. And like all the craft in Japan, even the tools are so important and also very beautiful. So here you can see the ink tracing onto the fabric. And here you can see the steps that involves in this process of tie-dyeing. So first, the pattern is traced. You can see it on the top left. And it takes many, many hours to do this. It's mostly made by hand. There are also some machines today that can do some simpler work, but mainly it's still a handwork. And to the right, top right, you can see when it's dyed, and the bottom picture when it's opened up. And here is, I met two old ladies in this place that I talked with, and they were in their 75, say 80s maybe, and I asked if they saw themselves as masters, and then they both laughed and they said, no, maybe within like 10 years, when I'm around 90, I might be a master, but I would really call them masters in craft because they did this kind of tie-dyeing and their hands were so beautiful, working so quick with the thread and the tools. Sometimes they are only using their hands to pull the fabrics and the threads, but also those kinds of metal hooks are used to get some kind of pressure on the fabric so that you can wind the thread properly. So here you can see one of the patterns. It's called Kokuri Shibori. And that's also important in Japan because you always need to have the proper name for things. So you can't just say Shibori because then they don't know what you refer to because all techniques has its own name. So this is the Kokuri Shibori. I also met Hiroshi Murase, a master. He is one of few that still works with the traditional sukumo indigo dyeing techniques. Most of the dyeing houses here in Aramitsu have started to work with synthetic dyes today, unfortunately, but he still maintained the craft, the traditional craft. And I don't know if any of you recognize, but this is the same as the painting before that showed Aramitsu. So he transferred the painting into this dyed wall hanging piece. He also runs a company called Susu's and it's located both in Japan and in Europe. And they work with quite modern garments, but using traditional techniques to make patterns on the garments. Then I continue my train trip and went to Kyoto. And my first stop here was actually in this wonderful place called Aoni. So those of you who will go to Japan, I say this is a must, especially if you like fibers. It's fiber heaven. It's the best source for natural fibers in the world, I would say. She keeps both threads and fabrics in stock. And it's bast, nettle, hemp, ramie, cotton, linen, and all kinds of blends, but all natural. And she's also a dwell of knowledge, so you could ask her anything. And it's also possible to purchase from Europe, so you can see, you can take a picture if you want to. You have the website in the bottom. But the main reason for me this time to go to Kyoto was actually to visit Miami Village. It's 1 hour north of Kyoto City, and it's a World Heritage, and it's famous for its crafts, not just textile. And in this village, there is a place called the Little Indigo Museum. And you can see the houses there are built with traditional methods, and they have straw roofs still. And I went here to visit Hiroki Shindo, who's the founder of the Little Indigo Museum. Unfortunately, he's not with us still because he passed away just a couple of weeks after I visited him, actually. But he was a master also in indigo dyeing. He worked in a very contemporary way with the indigo, so and also very free. So even if he used this traditional method, he had an artist mind. And here you can see the house, how it's built with a studio in the bottom and then the museum on the top floor. And I was so lucky to meet him because he didn't come to the museum that often since he was sick. So yeah, it's a real treasure for me to have met this man. And here you can see his indigo vats with a big blue indigo rose in the middle. And that's what tells you about the condition of the vat. It's supposed to be this metallic, strong blue, almost violet, when a vat is healthy. Quite often the dyers, they keep 4 vats and a stove in the middle to maintain the same temperature. And they are also placed in the floor. So the position when you dye is not so comfortable. You have to bend down over the indigo vat. Quite often it's very deep, can be anything from 2 to 6 meters deep, depending. Here are some pictures from the museum and the collection that he started to collect actually already as a student. And it's a lot of unique pieces from all over the world, so not just Japan. And to the right, you can see a typical fabric made and used by farmers that I talked about in the introduction. And here is one of his artworks. This one has also been exhibited at MoMA in New York. He also worked with a shibori technique called arashi shibori, and that's when you wind fabrics on big rolls and press it together, sometimes using threads to even make a harder pressure. And then when you dye it, you dip the whole cylinder in this case. And since the fabric is so dense and the pressure is so hard, only the parts that are the outest will become blue and dyed. And then you achieve those kind of beautiful blue stripes. In this village, I also met Kamimura and her husband. And she actually started as an artist, a painter, but she got to know about Hiroki from an art teacher, and then she went here to study for him for a couple of years. he didn't want to take her at first, so she wrote a lot of letters, and then she just went to him and said, I will start here. And so she did. And also they stayed here in the village. So they live there now together with their family and indigo vats. And as for many artisans in Japan, the studio and the home is almost the same space. So actually here it's in the kitchen. So the vats are in the same room as the kitchen. And she works mostly with hemp fabrics and hand-sewn garments that are piece-dyed. Also, I couldn't resist her beautiful shoes, also indigo dyed, of course. So you can't really talk about indigo and shibori without mentioning Katano. Motohiko Katano, he is a pioneer in indigo dyeing, and he also invented many of the popular shibori patterns that people or dyers still practicing. And this is maybe the one that's most famous, the Katano shibori pattern. And he was also a modernist painter from the beginning. But at the time, in the 60s or 70s, the government, they wanted to encourage people to start with the crafts so it wouldn't vanish. So he started to explore dyeing techniques and indigo and shibori. And with him was his daughter Kaori, and I think she was actually as important as him, and she also continued to dye after he passed away. So she carried on the legacy of his work. Unfortunately, there were no family members that could take over after Kaori. So the whole collection of fabrics, books, samples are sold on auctions. But luckily, some of the craftspeople that I met had managed to buy some of the books and some of the collections. So here are some patterns that he has made for kimono. And after Kyoto, I continued to Tokushima, and Tokushima is the main area for indigo cultivation in Japan, and also the production of sukumo. So historically, there have been hundreds of farmers that have been dyeing and cultivating indigo in this area, but today it's mainly 5 of them. And one of the dyers that I met here is this woman, Makiko, here together with her husband. And Makiko had also learned some of the techniques from Taka, actually, so they knew each other. She's also been studying from several other indigo masters, and her specialty is actually sewing. So she doesn't work with tie-dye in that sense. It's much more about the stitching. And I went here to learn this pattern, Kiko Shibori. And this is in her studio where she practicing. She kept 3 indigo vats at the same time. So they are in different stages because it's depending on when you actually start the vat. It's also dependent on the temperature, humidity, etc. So the vats can be like really strong and quite weak depending on how they started. I got the chance to work with her mother vat. I was so happy for that. So here we dipped my piece that I tried with the shibori. And Makiko, she's really tried to master the sewing and control the results. So she made a lot of test pieces, and she made the same pattern over and over again on different kind of qualities. So here you can see some of her works. she was also very interested in the chemistry of the indigo vat. And here we visit another dyer, and they are discussing the condition of his vat that you can see to the right, also with the blue indigo rose. And they are actually tasting the vat. That's the best way to tell how the vat, the condition of the vat. So, and for me, it was really fun to see them talking about it, like, yeah, for half an hour, the condition of the vat. I didn't taste though. So here you can see some of the test pieces that I worked with, tracing first a pattern and then a lot of sewing. And then you pull everything together very hard to achieve this kind of resist pattern. And those are the pieces that I made, the one Kiku shibori and one Ohangi shibori. And both of them involves a lot of sewing, folding, and then finally dyeing. And you can see they are quite dark, and they are dipped 8 and 12 times in the vat. So a little bit about the pigment itself, the sukumo, that's unique for Japan. The technique they are using is a fermentation method, and it takes around 90 to 100 days to produce the pigment from leaves. And it's a totally natural fermentation, so it's only water and some sake that are used. And it requires a lot of attention and precision so that the leaves not rotten too much. And once the pigment is ready for dyeing and you are supposed to set or make your vat, it takes around 7 to 10 days to get the vat in the right condition. And this is a pre-industrial method. And it's actually a living vat that you make from this, from the sukumo. And here you can see an indigo field. And the indigo that they are using here in Japan mainly is the Persicaria tinctoria. And the cultivation take place in the middle of the village quite often. So here you can see it's around 1.5 months in. They are planted on fields in rows, and it takes around 4 months before they are ready to harvest. And they harvest around 3 times, sometimes just 2, depending on the weather and the conditions. And here you can see they have harvested and then they dry the leaves. And they pile the leaves up in a compost that they need to stir. And they also add water regularly. So in this process can be tons of pigment working with. So it's also very heavy work. So here you can see the pile. And the last step is that they cover the whole pile with jute sacks. And here you can see how they are distributed. It's so beautiful still. This is the traditional bags that are used for the sukumo. And this picture is from Taka Studio. We also went to visit a ceramic artist making the pots for the vats. And they could contain in between 200 to 600 liters of liquid. And to the left, you can see it's upside down, and to the right, you can see them placed in the ground, 4 and 4, with the straw in between. So it's only the brim and the top of the vat that you can see. To the left, it's a test piece. So they have tested the condition of the sukumo and the color before they start to sell it. And to the right, you can see the sukumo vat. And for a 300-liter indigo vat, you need around 9 to 14 kilos of sukumo. So it requires a lot of leaves, of course. So my final stop on this trip was in Kurume in Fukuoka in the south of Japan. And here I met this man, Kiyoso Shimogawa, whom I met before. He's also been to Sweden. And he is the owner of this weaving mill and one of few left that works with this traditional kurume techniques. And here you can see some of the patterns that I found in the factory, actually, everyday use. And traditionally, the yarns were always dyed with indigo and woven by hand, but today they are using more mechanical looms. And the inventor, they say, for this technique, this Ika technique, was this lady, Inu Den. And she was only 12 when she invented Kurume Kasuri, and she was a skilled weaver already. And she actually stained some garments that she started to tear out the threads and then explored how they met when she put the threads in the loom. And then, of course, it has been refined, and many other craftspeople and artisans have made their interpretation. But she's supposed to be the inventor of this technique. And the Kurume Kasuri involves around 32 different steps from the design process, transferring the pattern onto the yarn, both in the warp and in the weft. So it's also very precise how it's made. Here they have a machine for the winding of the yarns. This has also traditionally been made totally by hand, but today they have some tools for it. But still, it requires a pair of hands, measuring and also checking the machine all the time. A dyeing house, also one more. And you can see to the left, they keep track of the youngest and the oldest vat so that they know the condition and how much pigment it contains still. And every day they dye a small amount of yarns or fabrics in the vats because that's the way to maintain a vat for a long time. And the dyeing itself. So here's the oxidation process, and to the right you can see the ready dyed yarns. Also the yarns hanging for drying. And to the left you can see one of the looms. So even if it's run by electric power, still it also needs hands in the whole process because the threads easily breaks and you have to see that it's even all the time. And here is actually a hand woven piece. And you can also see how precise it is with the dots that are resisted. So, thank you. And you can check out more and read more about the trip on my Instagram. And also, if you're interested to learn more about shibori or other dyeing techniques, you can check out my website. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, for this. Thank you. Okay, then we go to the next speaker, and that will be Birgit. And I say, Birgit, she worked as a textile biologist for several years, and she will talk about the relation between composition and properties of linen. So I give the word to you.
So, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Good start.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and also very much thank you to Linda for this, very, fascinating journey you have been on. It's It's a bit difficult to come now because we will now change into a completely different topic that is not very artistic and is much more into technical terms and details. And I hope you can manage to do the shift and hang on as we go through the slides. I will be talking about properties and structure of flax stem and linen fibers and fibrils and fiber bundles, and even go to the molecular level. I will do so by comparing also with the other textile materials, so in different ways throughout the presentation. This is a very, traditional way to classify textile fibers. Here you see the natural fibers. Oh, you cannot see that. Now you can, I hope. Here we have the natural fibers and the manufactured fibers on the right side. And here in the middle, you see actually the two kinds of cellulosic fibers, both the plant-based natural fibers as well as the manufactured fibers. And I find that interesting myself very much to look into how is it and why is it that these fiber classes have actually different properties now that they are made of cellulose, both of them. And I will get to that a bit later and use flax as an example. I will also dwell a little bit at the volumes of textiles. I think most of you here know that animal-based fibers make up a very small fraction of the global volume of textiles today, around 1%. That is also the case with flax and the other bast fibers, 1 to 2% of the global total volume of textiles. And here in the plant-based cellulose natural fibers, it's, the cotton is who makes up the majority with about 27%. Here we have the other cellulosic fibers, the man-made cellulosic fibers. They only make up around 6%. And then we have the big guy in the class is, of course, the synthetic fibers that are way above half of the volume. In the corner down here, I show a forecast of how the development of textile production is expected to become or develop. And we are here in 2024. The red line indicates polyester, which is increasing. In general, the demand for textiles is also increasing pretty heavy. And that is especially seen here with the polyester fibers. It is not seen so much with cotton for many reasons, but the output of cotton on a global level is stagnating. It is not increasing so much anymore. But then you can see here reflected in the man-made cellulosic fibers that it is actually increasing. So even though it is starting at a low level, it is increasing, probably because of the stagnation of cotton. I will also address a bit about the raw materials, because that is something that is often not addressed and that will become increasingly important. I have indicated here that at present, the textiles we have now are all basically all of them are made of virgin raw material, which means that it is, produced for this specific purpose and takes up area in the case of animals and with plant-based, and also here with the plant-based polymers. It takes up a lot of area. That is a challenge now with the different global crises we have, specifically with the biodiversity crisis, because the more area it takes up for the cultivation of anything, we cannot leave area for nature to become biodiverse. So the raw material should preferably be non-virgin, meaning that we should use raw material from other industries, for example, from agricultural sector, or a waste stream of recycled textiles. Otherwise, especially if we look here at the last, the synthetic fibers that are so big in volume, it should definitely be lowered in volume. That's crucial. But regardless, it should also become, the raw material is now virgin and it is fossil, and it should absolutely become bio-based or made of recycled materials in the future. And that will put an even bigger burden on the production of biomaterial. And I mean, the demand for area. So this, I hope you get the point here, that it is very important to look into the potential to use raw material that is not virgin and is not fossil. And natural fibers cannot really be that. So therefore, it is really interesting if we want to deal with the global crisis, then it is important to look into these different types of fibers and look into which raw materials are being used. That is very crucial. When I'm now addressing the synthetic fibers, they are very often not addressed very much because it's a group of fibers that people just don't like. But I will come with the statement here that the synthetic fibers are here to stay. They are around, and they do also have some properties that we are really fond of. I mean, just think of nylon stockings, the very elastic fiber we have here. It will be difficult to imagine that from linen. We can make silk stockings, of course, but I mean, nylon do have some superior properties here. Also think of a swimsuit, because what characterizes the synthetic textiles is that they are not moisture absorbent, and that is really an advantage in a lot of cases. For example, swimsuit and I mean umbrellas and stuff like that, but also in cases where textiles are being used in composites, for example, for wind turbines and for boat cases and car interior and stuff like that. So they are here to stay, and that is also fine as long as we shift from using fossil raw material and to bio-based or recycled, and that we use not virgin raw material. But I have already now started to look into the properties of the fibers, and I will continue along that line. Here you see the structure of the natural fibers. I have shown here the red ones. The green ones are the structure of the plant-based, and yellow is the man-made ones. It's simplistic here, but the point I want to address here is that the natural fibers are very complex in their structure, in the way the molecules and the fibers and the fibrils are organized in the fiber. That is not the case in the man-made fibers, and I will dwell or dig more into that now. Here we zoom more into the flax stem, and we see that the flax stem is made up of fibers. They are arranged in fiber bundles, and the fibers are made up of microfibrils, and the microfibrils are made up of cellulose chains as well as some other compounds. All of these compounds and fibers and fibrils are organized, I mean, in a very structured way. And that is, I mean, probably because the way the fibers are made in nature, molecule by molecule. So, I mean, when nature is building stuff, it puts stuff together in a very organized way. Here you see a close-up of the fiber bundles. It's the yellow parts, and the green part here is a stem of the flax. This is the core, that is, I have colored green here. And the reason for these two structures, and the reason why it is so organized is, of course, that it needs to serve a purpose when the flax is alive. And here, the green part is the so-called xylem, that is the vascular tissue that is dealing with the transportation of water from the roots and up to also of minerals up till the top of the plant, where then the photosynthesis is taking place. And then in the phloem, the so-called phloem here, which is made of the fibers and the fiber bundles, which is what we are using for textile. That is where actually living cells doing this transportation of liquids containing sugars and amino acids and nutrients that are being used and throughout the whole plant and stored in the roots. So again, the structure is carefully built and developed over evolution, and that is what is seen when you dig into the structure of natural fibers. Sorry. This was just a picture showing the different layers of the cell wall of these vascular tissue cells. That is also the fibers we use. And when zooming even further in, here on the microfibril structure, we see that it's also, not only made of cellulose, but also of, I need to move this one, sorry, of cellulose chains here, but also of other chemical compounds. Here's hemicellulose. There are also others that is not listed here, but very well organized and structured compounds. Then with these different levels of organization, I'll move to the processing that I'm sure all of you know very well and have maybe also all of you actually worked with in this 1 square meter flax movement. And I'll address the effects of the processing that happens at the different levels of the structure. Here, the English terms, retting and scotching and breaking and hackling. I have the Danish ones here. I'm afraid I don't know them on all the other Scandinavian languages, but I think you also know them very well, most of you. In this study, the researchers have been, what you see here is a part of the cross section of a stem of flax. And you see here the outer section with the fiber bundles, and then here the core. This study was looking into what effect and what is happening during dew retting, which I think some of you are working with, if not all of you. What they did, it's actually a very comprehensive study. They tried to identify which microbes are present at different stages and what activities they are doing. So what are they actually in charge of? And you can see here the time develop week, the first 0 week from the start, after 2 weeks, after 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and 8 weeks. And what you can see here is this epidermis, which is a very outer layer, is still here intact, and the bundles are sticking together, and the bundles are sticking to the core. And then as the retting starts, the retting takes place and the microbes start to do their job, we see that the bundles start to separate from each other more and more. Here we start to see that the individual fibers in the fiber bundles also start to separate from each other even more here. And here we see that the fiber bundles start to separate from the core, from the inner part of the stem. And this is then the part that eventually will become the shivers when you do the hackling of the flax. That was one example of how to investigate the effects. I have included this picture also. It is doing some of the same here. The researchers wanted to investigate which fungi are doing which job. So they isolated different fungi and cultivated them in culture and then exposed them to fibers in order to see what retting they did, the individual fungi. Sorry. And what you can see here is, I mean, these long lines here, that is actually the hypha of the fungi. So this is where the fungi has been colonizing. You see many more hypha here. Very fascinating to me to see at this level of detail. And this picture is, I mean, very detailed and shows very nicely that this epidermis, that is again the outer layer here, has been degraded, and the fiber bundles have been completely separated from each other and exposed, and is now ready to be released from the core. Here, a study is addressing the effect of chemical retching. We see, look, a magnification and zoom into the different fibers here, fiber bundles. The first picture here is the untreated fibers or fiber bundles, and you see that it's covered with this, I mean, substance that is coating and covering the fibers. With all the three treatments here, alkaline and enzymatic and the steam heat treatment, we see that the fibers have been exposed. This waxy compound that is surrounding has been degraded and removed. We can also see that, I mean, only the alkaline and enzymatic treatment causes the individual fibers to be released from the bundle. That does not really happen here with the steam heat treatment. This is then a picture showing some different effect. This is the effect that can be seen after mechanical treatment, which you also do when the process is done manually. This is a different kind of microscopy instead of SEM, scanning electron microscopy. This is more conventional light microscopy, but they use polarized light. And by doing that, they can see these kink bands light up with, this is actually like indigo color, I just see now, but not so artistic though. This is, the white bands are these kink bands, and they refer to them as weaknesses and areas where the fiber has been, I mean, it's defects in the surface of the fiber. And you can see here, this is lab scale fiber extraction. There are not so many kink bands as in conventional industrial extraction of fibers. So this is a way to see how the fibers is being affected by mechanical treatment. This is explained in a way that it's caused by disorganization of the cellulose fibrils. And this is a picture I showed before of the cellulose fibrils. So these, I mean, this structure is the cellulose fibril, microfibril. It's made up of cellulose here and here and hemicellulose. And when they talk about the disorganization of the cellulose fibrils, then it's something like these bulks you see here, where the chains are not aligning exactly along each other. And that may be a consequence of the mechanical treatment of the stem on the way to make linen fibers. So the last study here I will address is a favorite of mine. It addresses different points. It will dig even further into the structure, not only at the level of the microfibril, but even at down to the molecular structure of the fiber, and illustrate how changes at this level of the structure can actually also have effect on the property of the fibers. There's also another point addressed here, because what these researchers are working with is a side stream byproduct from the flax industry. They use here what they call noils. I must admit I don't know that expression, but it's the smaller fibers that are separated away from the long fibers that are the ones you are aiming at throughout the process. And it's also contaminated with the sheaves, I mean the core part of the stem. So this is the waste fraction that they are not really using for anything. I'm aware that it can be used when you hand spin to spin yarn out of, but it needs care to take out the sheaves, and that's, I mean, tedious and cannot really be done in industrial setting and is not price efficient and all that jazz. So what they do here is to use this fraction that has been carefully taken out of stems but cannot be easily used to spin yarn. And then they actually dissolve it, as is shown down here. This dissolved cellulose that is contaminated with lignin and hemicellulose and some stuff is then being extruded through spinnerets, much like when we make spaghetti, just much smaller. And then these, I mean, small spaghettis is wound upon a cone, as is seen here. And this is then the very simplistic way of explaining how man-made fibers are made. And these are the ones that I have already addressed before. This is also the process I've been working with myself. So find it, of course, on a geek level, very interesting. But the point here is, one, to address the raw materials that are used. So when we continue to make flax, which of course we should, then it will make a lot of sense to actually use the side stream from here as a source of raw material for other textile materials. And that is what is demonstrated here. The other aspect is that the reason why the flax here and these newly made fibers are different is because the organization of the cellulose chains. Because what happens here is that the cellulose chains are reorganized. What you see to this at the very microscopic level, molecular level, is the chains of cellulose organize and align them. But here and there are these unordered or amorph regions where the chains do not align very strict. And that is actually a good thing. The more crystalline, I mean, these very well-ordered regions, the bigger they are and the more there is of that, the more you will have what actually characterizes linen, which is that it wrinkles pretty badly. It is more difficult to dye because the structure of the molecules are so well packed, which makes it difficult for the dye stuff to intercalate in between here. And it also makes the fibers stiff, and it has this lower flexural strength that characterizes linen compared to other cellulosic fibers. And I mean, especially compared to the man-made fibers that are made of cellulose, but where the difference is that the crystallinity is not so high anymore because the molecules have been reorganized. So that is an example of, at the molecular level, when it is organized in a different way, it will actually have an effect on the property of the fiber. And that is the last part, not only one slide, but the last part where I will address a little bit the properties, some selected properties of textiles. They'll follow a lot of data here, but before that, I'll shortly address these properties up here, technical terms. The fiber tenacity has to do with the strength of the fiber. It is related to the density or the cross-section of the yarn, but regardless, it has to do with the strength of the fiber or the yarn. The next one is about absorbency, that is how much moisture can be regained in the fiber. Third one is about density, that is the weight of the fiber, defined technically in this way. And then we have elongation at break, which is how much you can draw in a fiber before it breaks. And the last one is elastic recovery, where you see here how much or how capable a fiber is to recover its shape when you have stretched it. So these technical terms end up here in this pretty busy slide, but I have tried to make it as illustrative as possible. So I use these icons out here. Linen, we have here this nice little blue flower. And when we look at the fiber tenacity, linen is located here, or flax as it is referred to here. It has a rather high strength. It has a higher strength than cotton, And however, when you compare with these trees, which refers to the manufactured cellulose fibers, which should not be made of tree in the future, but that was the best symbol I could use. You can both see that we have fibers that are manufactured that are weaker, but also some that are stronger. But in general, fibers, linen is pretty strong here. But again, you also see that even though it's made of the same molecules, it has different properties. Absorbency, water retention or moisture retention. Here, flax is superior together with wool and also together with the other cellulosic fibers, where cotton is actually the one performing the worst. Again, worst, I mean, depends what you are looking for, because in some cases it's actually very preferred to have fibers that do not absorb moisture. But I hope you get my point here, that even though they are made of cellulose, they do actually have different properties. Density here, flax has a very, I mean, has this density here, and it compares very well with cotton and with the different cellulosic fibers. Then looking into elongation, here is where you see flax or linen be completely different, because here is flax is, I mean, at the very bottom. It is a really poor elongation properties, more poor than cotton and rather much more poor than the regenerated fibers. And also the elastic recovery. Here again, we clearly see that the flax fiber is more stiff and I mean has lower flexural flexibility and strength than other fibers. So it's just, I hope you get the impression here that the different fibers do have different properties, even though they are made of the same chemical compound, namely cellulose, for example. And I mean, you cannot pinpoint one of these materials and say it's the best one. It will very much depend on what you are aiming at. I think this was actually the last slide from my side, and I want to say thank you very much for letting me have the opportunity to actually spend time on digging into the rabbit hole and yeah, well, spend time on it, which you don't have a lot of in a daily day. I hope you got more knowledge and awareness on structure and properties relation and how the effect of processing may look and at what level of the organization, and how flax is comparing to other fibers in general in different ways. Not to say that it's worse or better, but it's different and we need that.
Thank you so much, Birgit, for this. Okay, now we are giving the word to Raya, and we are changing pictures. Welcome, Raya. And you are a designer, and you will talk about unique texture, durability, and ecological benefit of flax. So I give the word to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks a lot, Birgit. You explained much more precisely what kind of qualities I'm using in my work, as I never could have. So it was very interesting for me to because I'm really trying to get out from linen, or actually flax, quite many of those properties you were explaining us in a form or in a chemical point of view. Yeah, my background is actually on handicraft school, and then after that I proceed to the university where I learned design and textile arts, and I actually did my thesis on knitted structures, so I'm a rather technical person also, because I learned how to program an industrial knitting machine, and I have been also working in a weaving mill making designs and different kind of things. But that's kind of a character of myself. I'm very interested in many things textiles provides. So in the next picture, we can see some of the start, or well, not really the starting point, but from the quite beginning when I started to use flax as a material. In generally, I consider textile materials kind of valuables. And I have hard times of throwing away textiles because for me they carry on kind of valuable things. And during my handicraft school studies, I had to learn different kind of traditional textile techniques, spinning, weaving, and different kind of ribbon weavings, etc. And I was very bad in spinning flax, especially because that, like Birgit told, that there's quite interesting properties of flax, and it's not very easy always to handle in the way into the direction where you want it to be. And but on the other hand, I thought that it has also really interesting qualities which I could use as a material for brooches. And if you think about the history in generally, human beings, they have been always made jewelry and different kind of the value or used valuable materials into that form they can carry with themselves, which jewelry is a very great example of that kind of end use of the valuable materials. And as textile materials were important for me and valuable, I started to make different kind of earrings and brooches, etc. And these are actually, I would say, 90% of flax. And some parts, like the parts on the fish, are also sisal fibers, but mostly they are made of flax. And I use flax a little bit like it would be a clay. I form forms with it. I draw with it, so it's almost like a line, and then I paint with it, so that it's almost like a paint you get from the tube. And so again, the great quality flax has is the density, the ratio of the volume and weight, and therefore it could be also quite a big piece. For example, here I have the piece of roots in the last picture, and can you hear the sound? It doesn't sound textile, does it? So and this is just pressed very tightly, but it's also very thin and very lightweighted, so that you can very easily keep it with the pullovers or knitted garments, which normally stretch very easily if you have a heavy item hanged on them. So it gave kind of ideal set of properties to use for these kind of objects. And the next picture, you can see the different kind of treatments used to flax fibers. These are made with the paper pulp. And the material, again, it's 100% flax, but there is a, how do you say, rust-free kind of iron yarn keeping the shape. And again, I used the very natural quality of flax. It shrinks heavily. When it gets wet and when it dries, it shrinks. And this is the quality I used. And again, please listen the sound. So it's almost sounds like a ceramic or something. So you have hard times to connect this to textile fibers. So these kind of paper pulp things I experimented a lot, and now I actually got a little grant to continue these kind of things I did on end of 90s, or actually no 90s and 2000. And I'm trying to find new qualities after I've been working in a different way with flax. Here are some additional objects made with the flax pulp, and for example the round pearls on the right hand side, they are made with the very wet pulp and just stretched over iron form, and then started to form it again. So there's a very or it's very important in which stage you start to kind of form the pulp, and how wet it has to be. So you have to make a lot of experiment to learn how does it behave in a certain way or in a certain stage. And here is one of the first works I did for a kind of artworks purpose to hang them on the walls. And here are natural flax and paper pulp that was recycled from the old papers. So, but the form was actually made with the flax paper, because that has much more better capability to keep the form when it dries. And this I come to the applications where flax has been used during the human history. For example, well, in the very beginning, I suppose armor has been made or kind of cheaper armor when you didn't have metal enough and it was too expensive to make full metal armors for the soldiers. So you made you layered woven linen fabrics and stitched them together so that it formed very thick, or well, several layers of kind of very hard plate, which was kind of preventing the sharp tools to go through. And that tells also unbelievable properties linen has, I think, that it can be very hard or also very soft, and almost anything in between. And that's what fascinates me. Here are some experiments and one work I did with the paper pulp as well, and used some yarns to give it more kind of a drawing-like character. And the next one is one of the works I've been making of flax fibers. Nowadays, I've been working over 20 years now with hand-dyed fibers of flax. I dye them. It's actually waste material from the spinning factory. When you start to stretch the kind of toe of fibers, just before you give the twist to the yarn, the toe will break down for some reason. The fibers are not maybe equally positioned in the toe, and therefore it breaks, and you can't feed it again to the process. So you threw them away, and those plastic bag or how do you say waste bags I have been ordering, and I kind of enjoy the fact that I can use some waste material for my works, and also the fact that linen is so strong compared to the thickness of it, that gives me possibility to make relatively big objects, they being quite lightweighted and easy to transport, easy to hang. So it gives many different kind of opportunities, and also the way you can use it into totally free, like clay. It gives you possibility to make holes and organic forms instead of keeping in a very straight format, like in weaving, for example. And also kind of three-dimensional way of working is possible. These are kind of half balls, and then I have been stitching them together, and to keep the fibers together. Maybe Birgit, you can say if because I have learned that fibers of flax, they have a kind of wax surface, and when you wet them and press them a little bit, the wax works a little bit like a glue, and they keep together when they dry together, so that you can in a way form free forms with them, and that helps a lot when you start to stitch them with the sewing machine. But of course I can also use nowadays when you have these water soluble films. I'm using them to keep the fibers better together when stitching. But this is also one example how it can be kind of lace-like structure, and then you can combine a thicker parts, and this again is you can roll it, and for most of the people, they think, for example, that my works don't fit to the public places because they are so fragile. And that is really funny for me because actually they are very, very hard and very durable. In one meeting, I was demonstrating it with a small sample I had made, and I started to break it like that. Only thing I got into my hands was some separate fibers, but the whole piece was keeping in a original format. This is one of the biggest works I've been doing. It's something like 8.5 meters long. It was actually in the beginning hanged in a vertical position into a kind of staircase space, but it gives a lot of possibilities. Let's go further, and then I've been making human beings lately, or actually, well, some 20 years. I make pictures of a human being, and one reason is that the way I'm treating the fibers, the texture and the material looks a little bit like a human skin. It's amazing how it transforms to that direction, and that makes me think that there's something, some connection with human nature and the properties of flax as well. And these are kind of 3D pieces which I have been just molded or formed freely by hand. And this is actually one piece that I made on the basis of this armor idea, which has been occurred already many times in the history. And it was funny, I didn't know that. And that time, 2002, there were not Googles and the internet like today, where you can find almost everything in the world. So I found from the children's encyclopedia a story of the ancient Romans who made already armor to their soldiers, and well, I needed to make it for women and a child because yeah, that time it was also some war going on, and I was really pissed off of how things are going, and so this was my attitude towards the situation. And but it's interesting how you can use the history of your material as a starting point of the kind of content and idea of the art piece you are making. And this we can go quite fast. These are different kind of methods I've been using to make pieces. And these, for example, I used the fibers almost like a drawn line. And if you think about drawing, and for example croquis, and then you start to shade a little bit so that you get the form of the 3D, and I used a little bit similar method, but my line was the fibers. And sometimes, or actually quite often, in the exhibitions, people are asking, where is the stitch? Where is it? That you are talking about that you are stitching the pieces, but I can't find them. And they are actually quite, well, I see them very well, but if you don't work with the material, they are probably hidden quite well. But they give me possibility to keep or make the structure stronger, and also in some cases I can adjust the color shades a little bit. And like Birgit said, that it's relatively difficult to dye flax fibers, and that's true. So very often I'm asked if I'm using natural colors to dye the fibers I'm using, and I'd love to do that, but unfortunately I have to also keep in mind that they don't fade up if someone buys the work, and then in couple of years it will be totally faded. So I'm at the moment I'm using reactive dye stuff, industrial dye stuff, so that I can keep the colors. But I have noticed that because I don't like the idea using those well, somehow harmful chemicals for making colors to my works, I have started to use more natural colors of flax, and luckily I have found different kind of shades from the different places, so that there's a kind of selection of the colors of the natural fiber too. So thank you very much. And if you want to see more of my works, I have a website. And then in Instagram, there are my works. And also in Linktree, you can find under my profile different links to different kind of videos, for example. And then 2 years ago, I had an exhibition in France, and there they also published a book of my works, and there's a text about the meaning of the material in the artwork, in the art process. So if you are interested in, there's probably some tens of the books still available, but it's the edition is almost sold out. So thank you very much. It was really interesting to listen your speeches. And
thank you, Raya, for this. Thank you so much.